Well, we're back in John, still in chapter 2, and we're seeing a couple of things that Jesus is doing there. There's one scene where he's at a wedding with mum and relatives, and then there's another scene where he takes off to the temple to celebrate a big Jewish feast called Passover, and there's some action going on down there. So let's just read some of these scriptures in John 2 and then think through them. Maybe see if we can get ourselves as if we were there. Find it usually gets a bit more exciting. So on the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. It's Mary. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. Well, that's a pretty generous event where not just Jesus, but your mates. I like this guy. Imagine being that guy who invited Jesus to your wedding. Wonder if we should invite Jesus to our weddings in a spiritual sense. So Jesus was also inviting to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour is not yet come." Well, his mum, being mum, didn't accept that. And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." So there were 6 stone jars there for Jewish rites of purification, water, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water and fill them up to the brim." And he said to them, "Now draw out some of the water and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who'd drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Oh, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then they serve the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Okay, so my buddy John the Baptist just tapped us on the shoulder and said, "This guy's the king of the universe. You go follow him." He's now seeing into our hearts and saying things about us which we find incredibly encouraging and strengthening. He's talking spiritually. He's seeing us when we're not even present and what we're up to. And now, at the party, he gets what is water and uses words and metamorphoses H2O into ethanol. Now, we can do that with modern biochemistry, but no one has yet been able to, just with words, without adding additives and fermentation, be able to do that. How would you feel if one of the guys you were hanging with spoke to a jar of water and it changed? Wow. I've never heard of that. I've never seen it. This is absolutely astonishing. What does that do for you when you see a sign like that? Well, it just makes you want to believe and believe and believe. This is the guy. I knew it. This is the guy they're all talking about. Look at this. This is astonishing. What about the heart of Jesus? It wasn't even his time. The guy had run out of wine, for goodness sake. Not like, hey, we've got a smallpox outbreak or leprosy everywhere. It was just a bit of joy required at the party and a bit of an embarrassment that needed to be covered. Wasn't even his time, but Jesus, out of generosity, said, yeah, I'm okay with that. And I think you're now seeing not only is this guy an extraordinary God-man who is so powerful he changes material nature, but he's also just generous. It's kind of becoming a really attractive guy to want to be around. Look, if I heard about this guy, this stuff was going down, I think I'd drop what I'm doing. I've got to go see this guy. Okay, so the scene in chapter 2 now shifts camp. We were in Cana up the top of Israel, and you've got a few days' walk with your disciples and your mates, and you end up down in Jerusalem, where the temple of God is. And there was a particular reason they went down. It was because there was an annual feast called the Passover, which was where the whole nation is supposed to gather around in Jerusalem and celebrate a time when they were actually enslaved as a group, just totally locked down in a foreign country, out of the land that was their own and promised to them, and being beaten. And God did this amazing thing of intervening with the totalitarian government and humiliating them. And this is all in the story of Exodus and Moses. On the final act of deliverance from God, the day that they left, God did an amazingly difficult thing and struck the land with the death of the firstborn child. The only way that you were going to escape that death was if you slaughtered a lamb and used the blood and put it over the lintel of your doorway. And so this actual angel, codename Angel of Death, would go over your home, see the sign of the blood of the lamb, and move on, passing over. And so doing, this broke the will, it broke the heart of their captors, and they let the people go. That was such a groundbreaking initiation, and struggling to find a word, but it was their time to start being a nation. It was their time to find a homeland. It did take 40 years from there and a whole bunch of things, which you can read of in the first 5 books of the Bible. But they were on their way. God had released them. They were on their salvation journey to get to a promised land and to become a people, to become his people. Because of its nature of this moment in history, that got remembered every year with a special ceremony. Everyone hooked in. Everyone came to Jerusalem, if you're obedient. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." And his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Wow, we've taken a sudden turn now. This is tough Jesus. This is Jesus with his sleeves rolled up. This is Jesus commanding people in a temple. Can you imagine going into head office of some denomination or some theological college and looking at the presidents and just basically starting to upend what they were about and upend what they were doing? What is this guy doing? Who are you? Jesus obviously didn't have any insecurity about his authority. He talked about the house belonging to his Father, which would make him a son. It would make him the Son. Now, can you imagine the emotions of the disciples? If I was with this amazing guy, everything was going so good, he was talking about all these great things, he was changing water into wine, he's calling me a new name, he's saying I'm integral, I'm a strong guy, I'm a true guy, things are so good, and now he goes and pulls this one. Hang on, these guys have got guards. These temples people, they've got power. Whoa, what's going to happen now? You'd be on the edge of your seat. You'd be wondering, are you going to get a visit in the night from some temple mob, some temple security agency? Now, I think it's interesting to look at Jesus' heart too. He's gone from encouraging and generous, and he's now cranky. I don't see any other way to look at this than a passionate upsetness about individuals getting in the way of people trying to commune with God. This is a house of prayer. People were supposed to be able to sit and commune and find the one who is in heaven. But how was that going? Birds are around, oxen, sheep, all this noise, some haggling going on, trade. This upset Jesus enormously. This was completely the wrong use of the temple. And he expressed it, and he wasn't afraid to express that tough emotion of zeal, anger. So the Jews that were in the temple, the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." The Jews said, "It's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he, Jesus, was speaking about the temple of his body. So when therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. So now we're seeing confrontation. We've seen calling, confirmation with his disciples, and now we're seeing confrontation with the opposition, religious elites, people in control and in power, misusing it, doing everything except bringing people to God, making their own purses full. And under this threat, they start demanding of Jesus, "Who do you think you are that you do these things to us? We're in charge here." I don't know, have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt Jesus has been asking you to say and do things, God's been asking you to say and do things, and it's caused a confrontation? Well, it did happen to Jesus. Now, righteous anger is his to have, because he didn't get overrun by sin, and that's something that we have to be very careful of. If you're finding the passions welling up in you, that we separate what is his passion from our injured or bruised pride or ego. That's something that's tricky, but doable. Okay, so finishing this little moment in the temple. When Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. Okay, so Jesus didn't stop at just a clean out. He actually went on and did amazing signs to confirm that he had the authority to clean the temple. He knew better than the religious guys about what God wanted. And so he started establishing it with actions. You know, he wasn't talking a tough game. He was playing one. If you were a religious elite misusing your power, you had every right to feel threatened right now. Because this guy's not talking it, he's doing it. They're flocking to him. Many people are listening to him and saying, I think this is the guy, I think this is the guy. Wow, that's threatening. That is really threatening. How do we go when there's gifted people around who are moving in God? Do we feel threatened? It's an instinctive human reaction, and understandable. But it is what it is. When you're in the presence of Jesus or the movement of his Spirit, we have to recognize it and we have to flow with it. It's just one of those things. So he's in Jerusalem. Many believed in his name. He was doing all these signs. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, the people who were believing, because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. And so even though there were believers who were getting excited by this powerful guy who was taking on the rulers and the elite and doing these amazing miracles, that wasn't really what Jesus was about. He wasn't about looking for people who are fascinated by miracles. And he could see into the heart of a person. He does not even need someone to come and say, oh, do you know that guy? I can tell you all about him. You don't need to. Jesus has this spiritual perception just looking into the heart, which is an absolutely phenomenal capacity and ability. We love it when he's looking at our heart and strengthening it. But it's also pretty disconcerting if you've got a dark heart and he's looking at it. And you're trying to hide it, but he's looking at it. And it's interesting that when he looked at the crowd, there was a lot of people there. He looked at their hearts. They were fascinated at him, but their hearts weren't right. They weren't a Nathaniel. They weren't a Peter. They weren't one of his truly. They were looking at the signs. They were fascinated. They were entertained. But there was something about their heart that he couldn't trust. And it wouldn't have been 3 years later that distrust came to fruition when those similar people in a Passover some years later condemned him to death. All right, well, that's a pretty heavy spot to finish on for this session, but just summarising what we've got out of there. Jesus, the one who takes authority, who takes charge, who steps up over and on the religious elite. I will be in charge. I will prove it. I'm not all talk. Look at the signs. Jesus is stepping up. Jesus is getting opposition going now. These guys didn't capitulate. No. They started planning. We've got to get this guy. Okay, so we'll look into chapter 3 on our next session.